Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Babies in Common Show. I'm Jeanette.
And I'm Melissa. Welcome, listeners. As a reminder, any information shared during the show should not be taken as medical advice. Please consult your own care providers about questions for your baby's health and visit babiesincommon.com/disclaimer to read more.
Awesome. So today is Wednesday, November 4th, 2020. We had a big night last night for the election, and it's still continuing today. So by the next episode, we're hoping that we'll know who's president, but this is not the show, so we
Yeah, because we are broadcasting from the United States. So
That's right.
I have a friend who's from Canada, and she posted on social media today, that keep calm and carry on.
Yeah.
It said keep calm and be thankful you're Canadian. Because everybody in the United States today is on the edge of their seats. So we will be not discussing the topic of politics today, but a topic that is heated nonetheless. So what are we going to talk about today, Jeanette?
So we're talking about what it's like to nurse a child for 5 years, one child for 5 years, as well as, just because our guest happens to be an expert in this one topic too, and the way that she's always raised her child is related, the concept of respectful parenting, which is a capitalized respectful and a capitalized parenting. It's a concept. And our guest is Emily Shugarman. Emily's been a middle school English teacher for 14 years. God bless her, with all those hormones raging in the classroom.
I was going to say the hormones.
And she recently finished her second master's degree, goodness gracious, in counseling psychology. And she lives in central Massachusetts with her husband and her daughter. So yay, thanks Emily for coming. We have wanted you on since we started this event, this show. And here you are.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I'm so excited to hear more about nursing a child for 5 years. I mean, I've nursed for 5+ years, but not one kid. Yep. So in total, and so maybe Marcy will be the one I nurse for that long. I don't know. She's pretty independent. She's too cool for school, that one. But I always joke that my boys, they're booby babies. They would have nursed till college if I had let them. So I'm super excited to hear about, I nursed my first until he was 3 and my second till he was 2.5. And I weaned both because I got pregnant. So that's what's interesting to me about my third. I don't have any, knock on wood, plans to get pregnant again. And so I don't have that impetus to wean. So I'm super excited about this episode to hear about your experience.
Yeah. And I've always admired watching Emily since before she had the baby, sort of just watching how she communicates with her then baby and then toddler and then preschooler and now kindergartner or first grader or whatever they are now. But just it's just, and I have always, before when I had my kids, I remember even before that, I remember when I was little and I was talked down to, like, oh, how are you? Oh, aren't you so cute? Like you don't understand. I just have this memory. I've always had this memory of looking at the adults being like, why are you talking to me like that? Like, that's so weird. And so I never wanted to do that with my kids. But then Emily seemed to take it one step further as I watched her. I was like, oh, that was cool how you said that. Like, oh, wow, I wish I'd thought of that. So I'm excited to hear a little bit more about that and her other knowledge related to her master's degree. So, all right, so let's start with the beginning. So Emily, you're pregnant. Can you share briefly how you prepared to breastfeed your baby and what your plan was, how long you thought you'd breastfeed, etc.?
So before Maya was born, we knew, I say we, but really it was just me. I knew that we were going to need help breastfeeding. I have inverted nipples and I was on some medication that was supposed to be incompatible with nursing a baby. So I found Jeanette and went to, at that time, Breast Milk and Cookies before Maya was born.
Yeah, the group I still have, but I don't call it that anymore.
And just started to learn anything about nursing. We also took, I think it was 26 hours of classes through Jeanette and the hospital and everybody else.
Good for you.
Thanks. Yeah, the end result was that no matter how hard you try, you're still sort of unprepared for nursing, or for the complications. So what was key for us was finding a pediatrician that would take my kid, knowing that I was going to be nursing on this medication, and then finding a psychiatrist who would see me throughout pregnancy like, and, manage the medication. And so we were really fortunate to find both of those. And I can't recommend that enough. That I still struggled with postpartum depression, but we had like a really good care plan in place to sort of, I guess, support me through that. And all of the work that we did before Maya was born helped to like set the stage for that.
I have a quick question,
Yeah.
Emily. You said I was on a medication that was supposedly incompatible with breastfeeding. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So, like before medications were rated the way they are now, they were like classed or whatever for, so this was a class 4, class D or whatever it was, medication, and you were like not supposed to take it while you were pregnant or breastfeeding, period, like full stop. And so that before I got pregnant, we started working on that because I need this medication. And what I had learned about attachment indicated that like a mom's mental health really mattered a lot, like maybe more than the risks associated with some medications. And
So
so
this was a psychiatric medication.
yes, sorry, yeah, psychiatric medication, yeah. And like Jeanette
what
did
have you
some
learned
research
since?
and
Yeah, what have you learned since about it?
well, that the research is or that the recommendation is probably flawed. A medication has to get a strict rating if there's been any kind of like problem with any baby as a result of it. So the Epstein's anomaly is a heart defect or a heart condition. I guess I don't know what it is that clearly anymore, but and somebody in a study on this medication, his kid had that. And so it immediately gets stamped, cannot take while pregnant.
Meanwhile, you could have a product on the market for your baby that's dangerous and known to cause problems with babies, but they'll keep selling it without any warning or anything.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And that's why I asked, because a lot of people, when they ask me or they ask Jeanette, is this medication safe for breastfeeding? We don't necessarily always have randomized controlled trials with large groups of participants in them. But what we can do that's different than with pregnancy is we can actually understand the pharmacology of the medication and how it passes into the milk. Is it lipophilic? Is it not? Meaning, is it fat loving? Is it water loving? What's the molecular weight? How big is it? Knowing those types of things just without studying it in a person, can this medication technically pass through the membranes into the breast milk because of its size and weight and things like that? And so a lot of people are always like, well, what are the studies saying? We don't always have studies on these things. So there's a lot of ethical implications regarding testing things on pregnant people or lactating women. And also, like, you can't really randomize these types of studies necessarily, like, you get the psychiatric medicine and you don't, like, it's not really ethical. And so, but we can understand pharmacology. And so, unlike pregnancy, where we have to worry about the developing fetus, with lactation, we often can say with a lot of certainty, even if we don't have studies on it, like, this medication is very unlikely to pass into breast milk, or this medication maybe could, but in concentrations that you're taking is not worrisome for the baby, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm glad that you really question that, Emily, because so many people are told, oh, you can't take this. And that might be based on some evidence or no evidence at all. And they just take it as fact and either stop taking a medicine they need or they don't breastfeed. And, if that's not what's going to help you be healthiest or meet your goals for feeding your baby, those are both kind of bummer situations, right? So thank you so much for bringing that to the forefront. Now, my question is, I believe I remember you talking once about needing to get some milk from a milk bank at some point. Is that true? And what was the situation regarding that?
So the medication that I was taking is one that passes through milk, and it's a medication that's been around for a long time. And so we sort of knew how, roughly how much would probably get passed. And we did not want to give Maya, my daughter, like strictly my milk when she was so little. And so we had two different milk donors. One I met at an open housey kind of event at Babies in Common when it was above Kids in Common, and the other was a friend of a friend. And so they pumped for me for probably like 6 months or a year, I guess. And
Wow.
we did that whole like shuffle to acquire the milk and store it. And my husband learned how to, do you know what's the word I'm trying to think of?
Pasteurize,
Yeah,
pasteurize.
pasteurize the milk on the stove. Um,
And
and so,
that was his job. He
yeah,
was like, I want to pasteurize it. And you're like, fine, you can do it.
right. Yes, I was not into it at all, but he
You
just
had
did it.
enough
It
to
just
do.
became part of the routine.
Hmm.
Um,
Awesome. So you
yeah.
basically supplemented your baby with that milk so she wasn't getting strictly the milk that you produced in her very earliest days with that concentration of medication in it. And that's also something important to note, that there are
Mm,
some medications that, are maybe questionably safe for a newborn baby, 6 weeks or less, right? But are not really a problem for an older infant. And so I'm super excited to hear that you really critically thought about that. And we're like, okay, let's get over this hump of the baby being the smallest and then take it from there. So that's really exciting. So what happened in with nursing in the early days and weeks, as far as like did you ever attach your baby to your breast? Like, were you just strictly pumping and then giving donor milk? What was that like?
So no, nursing like was not easy because in addition to all that medication stuff, I had like legit inverted nipples, and after 5 years of nursing, I still have one inverted nipple and one flat nipple.
Oh my
So
gosh.
um, so I mean, I knew it was going to be hard. It was hard from the get go, and I thought it would be painful. It was painful from the get go. And honestly, it's still painful. Like every latch is still a little bit painful. But it turned out that she had lip and tongue tie, and we, went through that whole business with the chiropractor and the revision, no, release,
release.
Release. Yep.
release, sorry, and did all that stuff. And it seemed to improve a little bit, but not in terms of the pain, it didn't help. But in terms of her being able to nurse less frequently, it helped. And we got off the nipple shield, and we didn't use pacifiers because we were afraid of nipple confusion. And my darling husband, when Maya was like little, fed her with a syringe, like, and a tube on his finger.
Finger
and
feeding,
then
right.
and then an SNS feeder, a supplemental nursing system feeder, for like a long time, because we were so worried that she would learn to prefer that and she wouldn't want to latch. And yeah, it was a process.
And then you ended up going ahead and nursing for a while. But what happened like the whole rest of the first year? So you get over the tongue tie and using the nipple shield and you got off of that. So how did the rest of the first year go?
Let's just be clear, I guess, that I really didn't like my kid until she was like probably 6 months old at least.
Mm,
It wasn't like I actively like hated
right.
her or anything. I
Yeah.
just was like, oh, this is like really hard.
Mm,
I am not into you.
mm,
We had this whole like, my therapist and I, or my therapy team and I, had this whole protocol for like when you're nursing her. So you make sure you look in her eyes, which sounds like so obvious, but
mm,
I was having trouble doing any of those connection things.
mhm,
And so we had to like attach them to specific moments in the day to make sure they were happening. And the idea was that I would like fake it till I made it or whatever. And I did. And that worked. But when she turned 6 months and she could like kind of smile more, and I don't know, it's a little more human, and I had like adjusted a little bit to motherhood. um, and yeah, things started to get better. And then as she got older and older and older, nursing was like less and less of a like job and more of a hobby, I guess.
That's awesome to hear. And I'd love to just
Yeah.
like stop on that point for a
Mhm,
minute and mention that it's fairly common for
mhm,
mothers and fathers to not necessarily bond with the baby right away, like regardless of how difficult the entrance your baby has to the world is,
mhm.
or how difficult breastfeeding is, even if everything's going quote unquote perfectly, right? Like
Yeah.
the perfect delivery and perfect breastfeed. I mean, it is a huge shock to the system to have a new baby. And add sleep deprivation and mental
Mhm.
health issues and relationship issues and support or lack of support on top of that, there are many people that just kind of feel like they are a spaced out zombie in those first,
Mhm.
weeks and months after having a baby and are struggling to really connect with their baby. I mean, I know that was true for me with my first Pierce. I definitely struggled with a lot of postpartum mood disorders, and I've talked about
Mhm.
that in other episodes. But I was so tired and feeling so crummy that, I mean, I just remember just trying desperately to just get to bedtime, like get to when I could go back to sleep again.
Yeah,
And
I love
so
that your
thank you.
therapy team, like, really figured out moments of the day that you could do that. But it's so
Yes.
true, like, you look at this baby and society tells us, "Oh, they're so cute, you're gonna love them right away, you're just gonna fall so much in love."
Right.
And here you've got this kid who's making your nipples hurt despite
Yep.
having gotten help and gotten through that, like, it still was hurting, and waking you up all the time and not
And they're
sleeping very
screaming,
well,
crying, and
it's hard to look at not everybody can look at their baby 24/7 and be like, "Oh, you're so cute," you know? So, yeah.
Right after I delivered Maya, I had a good, I had as good of a labor and delivery as I could have hoped for. Like, no, not medicated. I labored at home a long time. I delivered quickly once I got to the
You
hospital.
got a doula.
Yes, I had a doula who was great. Actually, she was so good. I don't even like really remember her other than that she was there, like making everything smoother.
Mm.
Like,
yes, right.
and she's sort of like floating in my memory. I I remember like I delivered Maya and then I felt great and I like looked around the room and I was like, yes, this was awesome. Like I am awesome. I like lost 80 pounds
Mhm.
to get pregnant. I'm in the best shape of my life. Like, yeah, let's just go home right now. And like everybody was looking at the baby and I was like, ooh,
Yeah, like, "What about me?
Right.
What about me?"
yeah, this is,
Yep.
I knew this was coming and here we are.
Mm.
Yep. That
So,
is so
Yeah.
true.
but you were talking about sleep deprivation and a pretty big part of our care plan for the family and for me was a chunk of uninterrupted sleep. And
Mhm.
so Ethan went to bed at like 7 or 8 p.m. and I went to bed at about 11 p.m. and he minded the baby from like 11 to 4 or 5 usually. He needs way less sleep than me, but so then I got like 5 to 7 hours sometimes. And then later I got up more and he slept more. But in those early weeks, that was the routine.
Thank you for saying
That's
that, because
yeah.
people don't realize that they're recovering from pregnancy and birth, whether that be a vaginal birth or a surgical birth. That, I mean, this is a process that is going to require some recovery. There's blood loss, even a normal amount, right? And many changes that are
Yes.
happening in your body. So, you know, on top of that, if you add manufacturing all of the nutrition that your baby is going to
Mhm.
eat
Yes. I'm also
and
talking mental
delivering
health
said
wise.
nutrition with your body, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Um,
What are you saying,
people need
Emily?
to,
The mental health wise?
Yeah, the getting enough sleep was like
Mm.
intended to be a protective mental health measure because
Mhm.
sure.
not enough sleep is a big risk factor for depression, as I'm sure you know. So
Mhm.
Yes.
in addition to everything you said, like that was our main goal.
It's great that he acknowledged that and did that as well. Not everybody manages to get their partners or
Yeah, the
something else
dance
to do
party.
that.
So, I mean, it sounds like you had not the easiest time in the first year. We have talked about mental health issues. We've talked about lip and tongue ties. We've talked about inverted nipples and painful nursing. So, what made you continue? I mean, a lot of people, they have in their mind, like, oh, I'm going to get to a year and
Mm.
then I'm going to be done. And spoiler alert, that doesn't usually pan out for, I mean, like, babies don't just immediately become like kindergartners when you hit a year. They're still very much a baby. And we've talked in other episodes about how this whole year of nursing is very much like, driven by formula companies, like, oh,
Mhm.
you can switch your baby to cow's milk at a year. It's not necessarily that that's what works best for parents and babies. However, you had a pretty tough time. You had some extra challenges that not
Mhm.
everybody has in that first year. And so, why did you decide to continue nursing?
I guess I went to group all the time, like
Mhm.
twice a week for probably 6 months or more.
And this is
And that,
breastfeeding support groups.
yes, and that helped to normalize the experience. So even though I had all those things, there were a lot of other people that had all those things and or had some of them or whatever. And I remember like the moment the single group that I went to where suddenly I was the like experienced person that Jeanette looked at and was like, hey, how about, that lip tie business or whatever. And I felt good, like, oh, okay, I'm on the other side a little bit. Um, and so I did that for a long time. I guess I stayed connected to some moms that even though they weren't my dearest friends, I knew that they were nursing older children. I remember somebody, probably Jeanette, like casually saying that nursing a toddler is the reward for nursing a baby. And I thought about that a lot. And then one time in passing, Jeanette mentioned that she knew someone who had nursed till 8. And then I even though I joke about it, because I'm competitive, but I'm not really competitive about this kind of thing. That like put it in my head, like, well, you could nurse till 8.5. And um, I don't really want to nurse till 8.5, but it just got me thinking. And then the years just go by. It's like not a thing. I don't know when we went from nursing when the kid is hurt to not doing that anymore, because I decided it's time to develop other coping skills, or nursing for every time you fall asleep, to I don't want to nurse you at bedtime anymore because it's obnoxious now to me, or whatever. I don't remember those decisions. They just, you just make them.
Yeah, but even like the concept of talking to your toddler, like when you're saying, like, I don't really want to nurse you to sleep tonight, and she was old enough for you to have that conversation with her, right?
Yes. Yeah, right. And it would sound something like this, like, not if my kid goes to bed at 6:30, and she's gone to bed at 6:30 for like the last 3 or 4 years. So I wouldn't say at like 6:20, hey, by the way, we're not going to nurse anymore. But I'm also not somebody who would say like 3 days in advance. I don't really believe that especially little kids need a ton of notice, because time is pretty elastic for them.
Sure.
So I might say at like a calm, connected time earlier in the day, whether that's like if we're making dinner together or if we're having bath together or whatever. I would just say, hey, I'm not going to nurse you before bed anymore. Bam. That's it. It's not something I feel guilty about. It doesn't have a lot of emotion attached to it. It's a statement of fact. If my kid says why, I'd say, I'd tell her whatever the reason is. Like, I don't want to nurse at that time anymore. Or I now have a class in the evenings, and whatever it is. And that's just that. And then critically, in my respectful parenting philosophy, but also like how I deal with my kid, of course, accept the feelings. She gets to be upset. If you have gotten, dessert or whatever every night for 4 years, and there's not going to be any dessert anymore, you're going to feel really annoyed about that. And she gets to too. And no condescending language, like, no, get over it. You feel bad about it for
stop crying. Yeah, get over it. Right. I mean, they're allowed to have emotions.
Right. And you just, like, by sitting with them and like modeling empathy and, reflective listening or whatever, you teach them that their emotions are fine, that they're not scary, that they're like acceptable, and, all the things.
Yeah. So you have been nursing for 5 years, as we've said multiple times. How is your family feeling about that, or friends? Like, who knows, who doesn't know? Like, how have you handled that? What have they said about it or not said?
My mom knows, although she was visited recently, and for the first time after a COVID test, and my husband flew her out. Okay, there was we're not like, we're stopping the spread here, folks. But she didn't ask for the first time. So I don't know if that means she's just like stopped thinking about it, or what. But other than that, in my immediate family, I don't think anybody knows, because
until they hear this episode.
Yeah. I mean, I also don't think they really care.
Yeah.
I don't know. Why would they care? In Ethan's family, there's like one relative who, legend has it, nursed their kid into toddlerhood or something. But, it's not been discussed.
Legend has it, never been proven.
Yeah. But I think, so many people think like, oh my gosh, if I nurse my baby past 1, they're going to be able to ask for it, and they're going to grab it for themselves. And so how did you handle those situations when she would either did she ever pull your shirt down, or like beg you for it, or did she ask for it,
For sure. Wait, hold on. Hold that thought.
Yes.
I told a group of people that I don't, that's a new play group for me. It's like a new COVID pod or whatever. And all the other moms have like under 2 kids and they're nursing them. And one day I realized that everybody was still nursing, including the like over a year baby kid. And I was like, oh my gosh, we're all nursing. Like, what are the odds? And nobody blinked. And they knew I meant now. Like they knew. And I was like,
Yeah,
yes,
right.
that's awesome.
That's great. That's great.
So in terms of like Maya grabbing my chest or hands down the shirt, I'm sure she did that stuff, but I undoubtedly like managed it in the same way I would if she did it. Well, when she was really little, I might have like blocked her and said, I'm not going to let you do that. And like actively prevented it. And now I would say the same thing. Like, I don't want you to put your hand on my shirt. And then I would stand up. And then, your kid can no longer reach your chest. You are standing
Right.
up and you are not holding them. And if you're wondering if they might cry hysterically, the answer is yes, because remember that for like however many months they had full access to their favorite food whenever they wanted it, and now they don't. And that
Right.
stinks. And it doesn't have like a whole lot to do with you other than that you're the person that said, the dessert buffet is closed. So, and it doesn't mean they're not going to nurse later or they'll be mad at you or whatever. They just,
In that moment, they're very much in the moment. I mean, toddlers are very much in the moment. And in the interest of fairness, I mean, toddlers will throw the same type of temper tantrum if you like don't let them run into traffic or like
right.
won't let them put their hand in the stove,
Or
so
the
like
famous one, I didn't want that cup.
Right.
oh, my
When you
son
see those
today,
like
he's
Facebook
4.
posts with all the pictures, like, I'm a bad mom because, and
Yes.
then like the
Yes,
kid is,
right. I love
trying to
those.
like put their head in the toilet or whatever.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
My son today on the way, we were driving in the car and he was hot because it was sunny out, but it's also cold out. So, and he was like, I'm hot, I'm hot. So I opened the window. He's like, I'm freezing. And so then I shut the window. He's like, I'm hot. I thought you just said you were freezing. He goes, but I'm hot and cold. And he's crying hysterically. And I'm like, I don't know how to fix that. So I mean, yes, kids are going to cry sometimes if you don't let them nurse, but they're also going to cry for a bajillion other reasons.
Right.
And one thing that I remember, and not everybody follows this, and that's totally fine, but I remember reading probably in some article when I was pregnant with my first that there is different ways that your child can ask to nurse. They can say milkies or ner or mum or whatever they want, right? And if you make them try to train them to say mum or mama or mommy or whatever for milk, that if they're like screaming in the grocery store or parking lot, I want mama, I want mama. You're like, people just think they want mom, right? Like they want their
Yes,
mom
so
instead
great.
of like, breastfeeding. And so,
Right.
my kids all called nursing mum. I have had plenty of friends who call it other things, milkies, ner, whatever. But it was just funny because, yeah, whenever my kids would like throw a fit about me, hey, you cannot nurse at the museum today. Like, no, we're not. And I pull my shirt up like, no, thank you. We're going to do that, later on. And they'd be, I want mama. I want mom. I'd be like, yeah, okay. They just thought that
my
they
kid
were like,
loves me so much.
exactly. They just wanted me, So
Yeah.
if people were super self-conscious about that, not that they should be, you can do whatever the hell you want. As Jeanette always says, and I'm gonna throw this one to you, Jeanette. Have you ever let anybody else tell you at any other time in your life who can suck on your boob? Probably not, right?
That's so Jeanette. Yeah.
And so, I mean, yeah, normally I don't let anybody tell me who can suck on my boob. And so it shouldn't be an issue. But if it was something you were self-conscious about, that could be something that you do. So was there any point, Emily, that you wanted to stop? I mean, I know I had mentioned it earlier in the episode that I weaned my boys when I got pregnant. And for me, not everybody, but it became very painful for me to nurse when I got pregnant. And so I very much wanted to stop. So at 3 years and 2.5 years with both my boys, we had negotiated trading eggnog for mum. And that worked pretty well. So what about you? Like, you're still nursing now at 5 years old. Was there any point where you were like, I'm done? How did that work
No,
out?
I have been like, I've wondered if my kid realizes that she's not going to nurse for the rest of her life. So I got one of those like weaning books, and it's like a very like little kitty used to nurse, And now little kitty's all grown up, and whatever. And it has a cute refrain about like, yeah, it has a cute refrain. And so we read that once, and she was like floored, sort of like, whoa, we'll stop nursing. And I didn't say anything about it. Nothing immediate happened. And
You're so
sometime around that
patient.
time, she like had
You're
it
so
out.
patient. I would have been like, what do you think about that? Well, what do you mean? And you're just like, I'm
Yes.
just gonna let that sit in her brain.
Let it simmer.
Yeah, I mean, right. Around that same time at school, I don't know how like nursing came up with her teacher. It was like the assistant teacher or whatever, but the teacher said something about milk. Maya said that either that she still nursed or she drinks human milk or whatever, and the teacher was like, "No, you don't," thinking she was like kidding. And Maya was like, "Yes, I do." And she came home and she was like, "Can you believe Mrs. So and so thought that I don't nurse?" And I was like, well, most of the kids probably don't. And she like looked at me and I was like, I mean, I don't know, maybe they all do. I'm just saying statistically.
Yeah, statistically, you're in the minority here.
And knowing you, Emily, you probably did say statistically to Maya.
And then maybe 6 months later, she went to a friend's house and they have a kid roughly her age and a nursing toddler, or like a 1-year-old. And before lunch, the 1-year-old nursed, and then they sat at the table and they asked Maya what she wanted to drink. And without hesitating, she said human milk.
Oh right. My God, that's so
And then what happened? Did the mom talk to you about that?
Yeah, her mom texted me, but they like laughed. Everybody, I think the adults all kind of laughed because they were so taken aback. And then I think the mom was like, said, well, I don't pump anymore. So do you want cow's milk? And I don't know what my kid answered to that. But she came back to me and was like, you can't buy human milk at the grocery store. And I was like, no.
They're so innocent. It's so funny because like, even though clearly that couple was breastfeeding supportive, right? They were breastfeeding their baby. And it's just funny, like the way she said it, like, I'll take human milk, please. Like, do you want a hamburger or a hot dog? She's like, I'll take human flesh. Like, it's just like the way she said it. Like, it's just so funny, but it's matter of fact, right? Like, it is human milk, human baby,
and you have normalized milk. It so much.
Exactly. And that's beautiful that you're like, hey, I mean, obviously there's cow's milk and goat's milk and human milk, and you happen to drink human milk from me and cow's milk from the store and whatever. Like, kids are just so like innocent and literal. Right. It's just awesome that she was just like, yeah, if it's on the menu, I'll have human milk, please. That's
and like, I guess to be fair to her, I pumped for 2 years at work, so she probably remembers having milk in a cup or whatever at school, and or it's close, it's on the cusp because she was 2. So yeah, but right, you can't get it at the grocery store.
And then one of the cool things about having a child who talks when you're nursing is they say the darndest things. Like I remember when I was pregnant with my second, my daughter, she was right there. I got out of the shower and she looks up at me and she like points to one breast and goes, that one's for me. And the other one, she goes, that one's for the baby. And then one time I was pregnant and she was nursing and she stops nursing, looks up at me, and she goes, after the baby comes, there'll be more milk.
More. I want more.
She was so cute about it. And then right after the baby was born, she didn't want to nurse anymore. It was like this matter-of-fact thing of like, no, that's for the baby. And I was like, what? What just happened?
Funny that you say that, Jeanette, because I feel like children who are around breastfeeding people, even if they're not currently nursing, just normalize that. Like, so my 4-year-old Asa, who was not nursing, he hasn't nursed since he was 2.5, but he has a 15-month-old sister who is still nursing. The other day, he brings me his baby doll and he goes, oh, mommy, can you give my baby mum? And I said, oh, buddy, why don't you give the baby mum? Because I'm in the middle of like 14,000 things at this point, right? So I'm like, why don't you give the baby mum? He goes, what? And he like lifts up his shirt. He's like, I have tiny nipples. You need big fat mums to nurse. And I was like, well, I wish my mums were big and fat like they used to be, but they're not. So, but I hear what you're saying. He's just like, yeah, you need big fat ones to nurse. I mean, come on, I got little bitty ones, So
We can
as
use
your
our
daughter,
imagination.
yes, exactly. Has your daughter said anything similarly hilarious, Emily?
She's pretty matter of fact about it. She does nurse her favorite baby Ivy, one word, baby Ivy. And but that comes in spells. She's never been like super attached to nursing baby Ivy. And sometimes baby Ivy gets a bottle. And we don't know where the milk comes from. It's a mystery for all of us, including my but she has definitely like looked at her chest and looked at my chest and been like a little concerned, like when I'm a mama and I nurse, I'm going to have nursers like yours, right? Mine are not ready.
Like, can I get the designer
okay.
model, please? Mine
Yeah.
are,
Yeah.
And then what does she say about the taste of it, or how much milk is there in the morning versus the evening, or does she like prefer one breast over the other?
No, when she was little, she sometimes had a preference, but she doesn't anymore. And she like we're in a pretty solid routine, so and we don't really like deviate from it, because there's sometimes where she wants to like switch it up, like, oh, could we nurse here, could we do that? I'm like, no. This relationship isn't really growing. Like, not like trying out new rooms and new positions. Like, this is not not where we are.
We do it before bed and that is it.
Yeah. I did ask her a couple of times if she could, like, what her tongue did, and she's been paying more attention to that, and now occasionally she'll like unlatch and say like, oh, this is what my tongue is doing. And
I love that.
So that's actually a good question, Emily. A lot of people think like, oh my God, you're nursing a 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old. I mean, just add any number, right? What does it look like to you? I know that for me, nursing a toddler looks way different than nursing a newborn. And especially when they start to understand like give and take and even bribery, right? Let's be honest. Like, oh, we're not going to nurse right now at the echotarium, but I'll promise you I'll give you some when we get home and we can watch TV or something, So what is nursing a 5-year-old look like in your home right now with your daughter?
She nurses I mean, when she nurses, which is like almost never now, right?
Right.
But
meaning she might go a few days without doing it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely like, I assume we're definitely on our way out. And because she went from like nursing every morning to nursing, I don't know, occasionally, usually in spurts, like 3 days in a row, and then off for a while, and before COVID, I would have been totally fine with that. But now I'm like, I nursed you for 5 years and we're in the middle of a global pandemic. This is the best immunity I can offer you. Get nursing.
But yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't realize like it can be very much a relationship that you negotiate, or it's something that like only happens every once in a while. And if you wanted to, Emily, not that you should or do, but if you wanted to be like, I'm sorry, we're not doing that anymore. These mums are shut off. Like, I mean, that's what I did with my 4-year-old now, who was 2.5 when he weaned, but just today, even he was like, he wanted to pretend to be a baby because, sometimes his 15-month-old sister gets attention and he's like, oh, can I play baby? So we pretended that he was a baby and we pretended that I was rocking him to sleep and whatever. And he goes, can I have my mom? And I was like, no. And then like, that was the end of it. Like, it wasn't like a thing, but some people would have been like, oh, I would have given it to him. And it's like, yeah, that's cool. Like, but I was just like, no, thanks. I already have enough people like grabbing at me. I'm fine with just one, but I don't judge anybody who would have like tandem. We've done episodes before on tandem nursing, which is nursing 2 children of different ages. And I think it's great. I mean, what does the World Health Organization say, Jeanette, as far as nursing goes?
Says nurse for 2 years and beyond, as long
and
as mutually desired by both baby and parent.
Maya's like totally down with that. She occasionally will say to me like, we both like nursing today, so we'll keep doing it as long as we both want to.
Aww. Oh my God, that's so adorable. She's gonna be a public health like leader.
That's awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, I just want to take a moment in the middle of our show, instead of the end of our show, to ask everybody to visit babiesincommon.com/show to view all our previous episodes and share them with your friends and family. And our show is available on a video format as well as a podcast on our website, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We love positive reviews, so wherever you can write them, on our Facebook page or on the platforms where you get your podcasts. And lastly, please visit our website, sign up for our emails. We don't send them very often, and definitely like everything and follow everything on social media to find out all the other things that we do, classes, groups, and other services. All right, so now back to our show. Emily, you've been a teacher for many years, and you recently went back to school and got a second master's degree. Kudos to you. Most people won't do that. And you went into counseling psychology. So your focus now professionally is parenting. So tell us more about your philosophy and what you learned and why you did the second degree and kind of what your plans are for that.
I always thought I would be working with middle school kids or like adolescents because I like them and have worked with them for a long time. And that's not out of like the realm of possibility. It's just not what I'm focusing on right this second. So like my dream would be, and the same, I had this experience with you, Jeanette, during our lactation consult, like when you came to my house where you stood behind me and you had like one hand on my breast and one hand on my baby, and you know, went like, and she latched like immediately. And I was like, whoa, it's possible. And I would like to do that for families, but in the context of like how to feel comfortable parenting, like how to set boundaries or accept the kid's emotions, or sort of how to finesse some of those nuances and help families like reach that, oh, it's possible moment.
Yeah. That just gave me a vision of you purchasing some sort of headset, like a hidden headset for parents, and you're on the other line, like at your house, but you can see, like there's a little camera and their little special glasses, so you can see the kid and you can hear everything, and then you can whisper in their ear, okay, now say this. Okay, now say
No. If I did that, I would say the same things over and over. Like behavior is communication. The kid is not giving you trouble. The kid is having trouble. A dysregulated adult cannot regulate a child, and so on and so on and so forth. Those are
No, that's so true. I remember saying
right.
that to myself when my son was a baby. He's not giving me a hard time. He's having a hard time. He's not giving me a hard time. He's having a hard time. Right. I mean, and that was for a baby, never mind a toddler or my 4-year-old who's like, I hate you because I like give him Cheerios instead of Cocoa Puffs. I mean, who knows? You know? So, I mean, what is
like Cocoa Puffs too better, Melissa? What are you thinking?
I know, right? Respectful parenting. Can you share what you mean by that when we say respectful parenting or mindful parenting? What do you mean by that?
So it's a parenting philosophy that really requires parents to do a lot of self-reflection. At the core is the idea that you can't, like, you can only change yourself, and which is always true, right? But you, in this case, you're the adult. So if there's like a really big, tricky, chunky problem between you and your kid, like you're the person who has to step up and change behavior. And so that's really hard. So you've got a lot of self-reflection, you've got thoughtful decision-making. And then I talked about boundaries earlier, and that could be both like physical boundaries, especially with younger kids. Like I would promote individual play spaces like that are totally safe, and we can talk about that more some other time. But it also would be like your personal boundaries or whatever. Pick your battles.
I don't want you to pull my hair like that. Please stop putting your hand down my shirt. Like I'll be okay with saying personal boundaries like that.
Yeah, but and when the kids though are so little, that's like too many. You know, it's a lot of words. So like,
okay, so tell me more.
If you're like, my kid always grabbed my hair, and the first step in solving that is for me to wear my hair up. Problem gone. Next step, if you know, for some reason I have like not done the thing I need to do, my kid grabs my hair, I might say, oh, I'm not going to let you grab my hair. And then I put it up.
Right.
So, but if it's something like less obvious, you know, I don't know if it's like the pulling the shirt down and there's some reason you can't put your kid down or whatever.
And you can't take your shirt off all the time.
Yeah, but you can turn your kid to face out in your arms. Sure. Right. So so boundary and limit setting is like obviously on you. It's on you to create a boundary that is comfortable for you and you can hold, because it's not a boundary if you're not going to hold it. And then it's up to your kid to test those boundaries. That's like normal.
Right.
And yeah. Okay. So I think I got a little bit off the question of what is respectful parenting there, but
I'm sure it's a lot of
No,
things.
I remember reading about something like this when I was a new parent, and the example given was something like, let's say you have a recycling bin that's in the kitchen and your kid always takes the things out of the recycling bin, and you're constantly like just really friggin' annoyed that like your recycling is all over the kitchen, and you are scolding and you're teaching and you're telling and all of these things. You're wasting so much energy. It's like, just move the recycling.
right.
Like, there's this old school idea that you have to be able to tell these very little toddlers, and they're supposed to understand, like, don't touch this giant container of cool plastic things. That why shouldn't I touch that, because I have all these other cool plastic things in my toy room. And it's not that you're spoiling your kid by taking it out of the room. It's that you're setting a boundary, and you're making it a little bit easier for everybody. Like, just take the recycling out of the room. Don't, if your limit is going to be reached and you're going to be screaming because the recycling's all over the kitchen, don't let them get to that point. Don't let them get to the point where they're where you're crawling up the walls because it's the third hour in a row that the recycling's all over the floor. Like, why have you let yourself get to that point?
And I feel like this is, I'm just thinking about the concept of respectful. Like, what's that mean? You're respecting your own boundaries and respecting your time and frustration by taking that out of the room. You're also respecting your kid, because that's like a tease for them, and you don't want. It's respectful to not tease people with something they shouldn't have.
Because she's a 15-month-old girl. She's not supposed to necessarily understand that she can't take all that stuff out of a container, because I've given her
it's not about understanding. I mean, it's not about understanding until sometime after like 5 or 6. It's about impulse control. Your kid, your little kid knows what they're supposed to not do or whatever it may be. Let's say they do, but then they see it and they want to do it, and that's it. That's all there is.
Right.
So after you've like realized that the recycling bin is a problem and you should move it, and that's the solution, and then for some reason it comes back in the kitchen and it's, you come in and it's all over the place again. In respectful parenting, you would apologize, perhaps. If you were having a big reaction, you would not like demand that the kid clean it up, argue, blah, blah, blah. You would say like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I forgot we were keeping the recycling in the wherever now. Let's clean it up. Do you want to help? And then the kid, if you ask, do you want to help? And the kid says no, then you just clean it up. Like, it's faster to clean up alone anyway, let's face it.
Right.
Two little other like ways to reframe. Your little kid, your 15-month-old, is sort of like an alien on planet Earth trying to learn the rules. So sometimes that helps. And another little refrain is to imagine that you're like, if you had a grandparent with dementia who was sort of systematically taking apart your house all the time, you would occasionally probably like lose your cool, but you would speak really like in general, probably calmly and respectfully. Oh, grandma, I'm sorry, y'all, let me just help you with that. I think you forgot that the recycling is not building blocks, right? And so that like kind of shift to think, how would
that
I
is really profound. That is a really profound
I did not make this up. Okay, I learned.
No, but I mean, like, that's like really hitting home for me.
I just want to cite some sources soon.
Yes, please do.
I think your recycling example came from Janet Lansbury, and she's like a RIE educator and has a podcast too.
Janet Lansbury is awesome. The recycling is actually my own personal example. I had to remove that recycling bin from my life.
That's awesome.
But Janet Lansbury is definitely someone that I follow on social media. So
that's funny. I really thought I heard that in one of her.
Well, maybe she came up with it herself.
No, who knows?
Yeah, no, maybe you did. But I honestly, that was authentic. I really had to remove the recycling bin from my house 7 years ago for my son.
Well done.
There you go. Yeah.
And then
Robin
who else?
Ensign from Visible Child is another person that I like read and study closely, and Ross.
What's the name? Robin what?
And Enzine, but her. Sorry, let me spell it again. Einzig. I am dyslexic, So that first time was a total loss. Her web page is Visible Child. So she's great. And then Ross Green has this collaborative problem solving approach that is like a whole nother sort of level of like dealing with this kind of perspective change, I guess. And his method is called Plan B. So anybody who wants can check those people out, or you can, Google it yourself or whatever, buy their books or blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. There. Sources.
So Emily, I have a question for you because I mean, I do follow Janet Lansbury. I'm definitely going to follow this Robin and Zig about it because I do love concrete ideas of how to approach, like maybe are very emotional, but I know that, like you said, I'm the one that can change my behavior. I'm the grown up. So I need to work on that. Right. That being said, my grandmother is very much the opposite of that. She's very like today, for example, there is a toy bench in the toy room that my daughter was playing in, and she wants to stand on it so she can look outside at her brothers playing outside. Well, my grandmother was like having a shit fit, on the lack of a better term. I mean, she was losing her mind that she wanted to stand on this toy bench, and she was like, sit down, Marcy, sit down, sit down, sit down. And I said, I'm like, Meme, I'm just gonna turn the toy bench around so she can't stand on it anymore. And she was like, no, if you do that, then she'll never learn, like she has to learn, she has to sit, and she's a 15-month-old. Like she is not she's a pre-verbal child. So what would you say to a parent that really, is hearing what you're saying about respectful parenting and wanting to do that, but is getting influences from other people in their family that's, kind of old school, like, no, you punish or you take away or right, they have to learn and whatnot.
So couple different like ways to go. One is the idea that the kid is going to have their own relationship with all the other important adults in their family, and that's not yours to control. It's not yours to control the adult or to control your kid necessarily in that setting. Your piece of that would be to like listen to your kid, empathize. And 15 months is like pretty young, so sure. I'm not sure I'm like really suggesting that for that exact situation. But in the moment of you want to turn the bench, no, she's got to learn. I read this meme like 2 days ago, and it was, not everything has to be a learning experience.
Yeah.
And, I think that really fits. You look at grandma and you're like, not everything has to be a learning experience. We're going to turn
because it was really affecting just our ability to, we haven't seen her in a couple weeks, and it was affecting our ability to just visit and have a good time together. Right. Because she was just obsessed with scolding my daughter, who she loves very much, but she really believes that she's doing the right thing by telling her that she needs to sit on this chair. And all my daughter wanted to do was see out the window at her brothers that were playing Nerf guns outside, So like, I'm just like, let's just like thank you, because I think that's what I'm going to have to say next time is, listen, not everything's a learning opportunity. Let's just like take this temptation out of play.
Yeah, no, that's so good. There's you shared some memes with us in advance, and one of them, I wonder if you could talk about, which I remember so much, says, if a child asks you to do something they already know how to do, it's because they feel loved when you do it. And man, I remember when my daughter was probably 2.5 or 3, she was very verbal, and she knew how to go upstairs by herself, right? But then there was like those moments where she'd be like, I want you to carry me. Or there'd be the moments that you're trying to go upstairs quickly and you grab them to take them upstairs and they throw a fit. No, I want to do myself, like.
2 seconds ago you said carry me.
What's that?
2 seconds ago you said carry me.
Yes.
Yeah. And I remember one time, like, she would go upstairs to her room by herself multiple times, like 3 or 4 times in a row. And then there'd be a moment where she'd go, Mommy, can I go up to my room? And I'd be like, you were just up there you just went up there 3 or 4 times without asking me, and now you're asking me. And it just like is one of those moments where like I would get frustrated with that, but in retrospect, it was probably that she was just like, oh, I feel like asking you because I want to involve you, you know? I don't know. Like, it's just,
Right. I want to hear your voice. I don't know.
I heard an interesting explanation for like I think a younger kid than in your example, but like a kid sits on the floor and they point in front of them at the floor and they're like, floor, you know, as in, is this the floor? And you're like, yeah, that's the floor. And then they point like a little further and they're like, floor. And you're like, yeah, it's still the floor. And you're like, what is wrong with you, kid? It's all the floor. Like, remember, they're an alien, right?
yeah.
They are
Right.
reality testing. Things like strange things happen in their world all the time. So
Yeah.
that is not all floor until you've seen it's all floor.
Right.
So your kid goes up and down a few times. And maybe, frankly, she's forgotten that she's done that. You know, maybe she's like that bit of life is gone. Or maybe she suddenly gets downstairs and she's like, oh my gosh, I went up and down the stairs a few times, and now I remember that I don't actually do that, and I don't, you know, what's the protocol?
Right.
Yeah.
All those
funny.
things are like normal.
I love that you're talking about like we need to be reflective about ourselves because our kids teach us so much. You know, you just
Oh, they
mentioned
really do.
floors. Like one of our funniest family stories was, I don't even remember why we were doing this, but we were asking my son, so we're trying to compare like floors. And so we're like, what's the floor in the living room made out of? And he's like, wood. And I was like, well, what's the floor in your bedroom? Rug. Well, okay, and the floor in our laundry room was different because it was like that, I forget what it's called, but it's like plastic, you know, with a pattern on it. Laminate, right? And so I said, what's the floor in the laundry room made out of? And he goes, clothes.
And you're like, accurate.
That is amazing.
That is like, you're right. We have a lot of clothes on the floor because we just throw them in there. Like,
Oh, as much as our kids like totally frustrate us and test us, and they definitely like one thing that's really cool about parenting in my experience is relearning the world through your kids' eyes. Like you said, Emily, they are an alien. So when they like come up with these like oxymorons or, you know, non sequiturs, you're just like, oh yeah, that is kind of weird. Like,
they must be looking at us sometimes going, why are you frustrated? What did I do? I don't even understand. What did I do?
No, that's true.
Why are you yelling at me? What did I do? I don't even know. I don't even know how to do what you're telling me to do. I don't even understand the words you're saying.
Right.
You know? And speaking of words, another thing you were talking, or you sent us in advance, was this positive language alternatives, which I think.
Oh yes.
Every time I
Wait,
hear them,
I want to
like,
pitch out another idea in line with
it.
if a child asks you to do something or whatever. Yeah. Closely related to that is this idea that like, because your kid has done something even 30 times, they can still do it. So their bodies are always changing, right? Just because they could put on their shoes and Velcro them for the last 30 days, who knows what's happened? Like maybe their socks fit funny, maybe their hands are different, but we like hear parents all the time saying like, oh, I know you can do that. And one of the things that we think about a lot in our house is like the, I don't know, you know, the saying, the only way to know that your kid can do something is if they've done it. Like if they are currently doing it. Other than that, apparently they can't because they just told you they can't and asked you for help. And they're not being manipulated. Like that's, you know, kids under 5 are not manipulative. It's not a thing they can do. Like their brain hasn't developed that function. They are trying to get their needs met. So maybe they need connection, or maybe their shoes really don't fit, or maybe they're so distracted in their heads that they can't like remember how to stay focused long enough to put their shoe on or whatever. But yes. Okay. So you know that they can do something when they do it. Okay. So in the language stuff, positive language alternatives. Yeah. Like, stop crying. I can see this is hard for you. Some of these feel cheesy to me, but they're really helpful.
Yeah.
Or like, stop yelling. You know, has that ever made anyone stop yelling?
Right. They just like amplify the yelling. It's like
and in my house it works, and I'm sure it's different for every kid, but like what generally works is to pull my kid closer. She usually needs physical containment when she's feeling like out of sorts. And I know other kids like take space or whatever. But finding that thing and then reinforcing it and offering it and, you know, making it no big deal is huge.
So speaking of
that is hard for me.
Yeah, I remember speaking of 5 years old, and Maya's 5, your daughter. When my daughter was 5, I distinctly remember like there was a time where it was so hard. Just generally she's like an angelic child, but that year was really hard. There was a lot of belligerence and I don't want to do it and I don't want to go there. Nah, nah, nah. And I would get to this point where I was just like, get out of my face. Like, you are making me
Yes.
mad. I don't want to get madder. I just need you to go to your room, get out of my face. Like, you're totally, like, she was a very self-sufficient child. She could hang out in her room by herself. And I was just like, you need to go out of my, like, I'm angry and I don't need to see you anymore because you're just continuing to piss me off. And then I read something or talked to somebody at some point where they're like, well, maybe if you hug her, and it's like the total opposite of what you're
Yes. It's
feeling
the
in that
opposite.
moment.
That's what I was gonna say. That's
Right?
exactly what
And
I
then
was
I
gonna
was
say.
like,
Mhm.
okay, next time she gets like that and I get like that, I'm gonna go, let's hug it out. And it was so interesting because she would like fight the hug too, but it was almost like
Mhm.
having that tactile, and like eventually we'd both calm down. It was so much better than letting it escalate, I should
Yes.
say. And it was so opposite. I was like, what? Hug her instead? Oh my gosh. And so like then I tried to do that. And so much of these parenting ideas, it's like so much. It's like breastfeeding, it's like birth. Like you think, oh, it's so natural. Like I'll figure it out myself. But there's a lot of
Right.
knowledge out there of people who've been doing this since the dawn of time. And sometimes it just takes you hearing it or practicing it or reading it to go, okay, maybe I'll try that strategy instead. And then that's the one that works so much better for you than what you came up with.
Totally, because kids deserve respect,
Mm,
but they're not mini grown-ups. Like,
right.
that's something I feel like, people sometimes like, oh, well, I don't talk to my kid in baby talk. I talk to them like a person. And like, yeah, that works for a lot of kids. And I definitely do the same thing. I challenge my kids to think in creative and elevated ways. But I also like they're not mini adults. It's
Mhm.
not the same thing as having an argument with your coworker. And that's exactly what I was going to say, Jenna. I'm so glad you said that because I feel like this might really speak to a lot of our listeners where when your kid's really being an asshole, right? Like, and like you just
I'll
want to be
mark
like,
this
get
episode
out
explicit.
of my, yeah, right. Like, get out of my face. Like, I could say that
Yeah.
again. Like, when your kid's being a real PIA, like, get out of my face. Like, I just want
Yeah.
to like, oh, but what you have to do is like embrace them and be like, I love you. Why is this hard for you?
Yeah.
And I always say like Daniel Tiger is my parenting guru. I don't know, Emily, if you know Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. Are you familiar?
We don't watch TV, so I know Daniel Tiger exists, but I have not seen it.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
I implore you, I beg you to make one exception for this one show because it is so good. Okay, like it's based on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Like the characters are based on that show. And it's all about preschool and toddler feelings. And I mean it when I say, like you said, Jeanette, we all say, like, oh, birth and breastfeeding and parenting is so natural, but it's not. Like, child psychology is not necessarily natural if you only worked with grown-ups your whole life, which most of us have. And Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood literally puts in jingles, and I don't get paid by this company. I just want to make that very clear. But like, for example, I had to use this one today. My 7-year-old got ticked at my 4-year-old and he whipped his coat at him. And I said, stop, stop, stop. It's okay to feel mad, but it's not okay to hurt someone.
That's great.
So funny because like there are these little jingles like that, like
Mhm.
what you're saying, Emily, these respectful parenting things that are like, okay, yeah, like we got to stop. It's okay to feel mad. It's okay to be so mad that your 4-year-old brother is being very unfair, but it is not okay to hurt someone. So I have to remember that too. I have to take a deep breath and nice and, take a deep breath and give myself a squeeze and calm the F down sometimes
Mhm.
because I want to be like, get out of my face. I can't
Yeah.
take this
Yeah, for
anymore,
real.
So
Oh.
I think that acknowledging that it's human and normal to feel that way. But like you said, I feel like I have to like put that on my mirror in the morning. Like you can only control your reaction to things, and you're the one they're looking up to, right?
Mm.
If you feel out of control and they're out of control, they're looking at you to figure out how you respond, right?
Right. Well,
So
and kids co-regulate, which means that they use you to help use like your emotional state to help them regulate their emotional state. So if you are escalating in a situation or like creating more and more tension, like, no, do it, you have to do it, or whatever, they reflect that because that is what their brains are wired to do. So regardless of if it makes them happy or not. Yeah, so if you can co-regulate in a way that's calming or soothing, then they will also, in theory, start to calm and soothe. It's not like a magic wand, you know. It's not, you don't like wave your empathy wand and now everybody's perfect or anything.
Sure.
But a little lavender and some nice music
Yeah.
might go. They'll be like, wow, it
And
smells different in here, and oh, the music's nice. Let's calm down.
Sure, and getting like into your body, you're getting them into their body instead of out of their brain. So can you can you
Sure.
bear walk on the floor? Can you do jumping jacks? Can you jump up and down? Can you run up and down the stairs? You know, whatever those things are, something like that. Sometimes helps kids shift and adults shift.
I use a lot of humor in music too. Like when I'm really mad, I sing, even though I'm really bad at singing. But like this morning, my 4-year-old's having a meltdown, and I was like, you know, you are being so crazy right now. And mommy feels like she's going to lose her mind. And like,
oh
they
my
just
gosh,
started like laughing.
You could have the greatest. That sounds like metal music to me. Like we could have like a cool mommy metal band.
But like I was really upset. Like I was really on the verge of like, you know, screaming at, you know, and like I just was like, okay, I'm gonna sing. And like they just started laughing, and then that made me laugh because I sounded ridiculous, you know. And so the laughter, of course, you know, decreases adrenaline and de-escalates things. So it all worked out at the end. My 4-year-old decided that he wasn't so upset about whatever else was so dramatic before, because 4 is so dramatic. But yeah, so I think that's definitely like, you can't always just flip a switch and feel better as an adult, but maybe you can say, all right, let's do 10 jumping jacks. Okay, let's bear walk. Okay, let's sing a silly song. Let's go for a walk outside. Let's take a bath. Let's, you know, and like kind of just break up the tension that's happening. I think that's, you know, those are all really good strategies. So, Emily, are there any last points that you hope that our listeners kind of take away from this discussion about respectful parenting?
You do not have to master it. This is not like, there aren't like badges or like belts with stripes or levels or anything.
But I want to be a black belt, Emily.
Then I will give you a black belt. If that's important to you, you can just have it.
But it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant.
The like respectful parenting journey starts with self-reflection and thinking about how you can change to make something, like how you can change to improve the situation. And often that is like thinking that you're doing afterwards, after you've done all of the like, oh my gosh, my kid was driving me crazy, they totally deserved whatever. After you've already had all of those thoughts and you've calmed down and, you know, whatever, then when you're like, okay, it seems like every night at bedtime this conflict is happening, how can we change this up? Can we have bath before shower or before dinner? You know, like just what are the crazy out of the box that you wouldn't think of? That kind of self-reflection starts heading you down the path. And then check out those other resources that I mentioned, like the Visible Child or the Plan B Collaborative Problem Solving or Janet Lansbury. They're a great, like fabulous experts in the field that can, you know, really offer some awesome advice.
I love that. The other thing I'm thinking of while you said that was that I know that we live as parents, at least in our current culture here in the United States, of a lot of shoulds. And we get it in our head that I should not let my child do that. I should make sure they have a bath tonight. I should make sure that they eat everything on their plate. I should make sure that this happens at this time. And when it doesn't go that way, no one said it had to go that way, but it's in our head. And so we think we're supposed to make sure it all happened that way. So there's this invisible pressure, when really, if you reflect on it, why does that matter? It's in our house. Why does it matter that they eat everything on their plate right now? Why does it matter that they do it at this time versus that time? These are arbitrary things that we made up in our house. We can change those, and that might go a long way to make everything
right. Yeah, why can't you have hamburgers for breakfast and Cheerios for dinner? Like, who cares?
Absolutely. Thank you
there you
so
go.
much,
That's
Emily.
my takeaway for the night, folks. Hamburgers for breakfast.
Just have hamburgers for breakfast. And
changing the title.
You know,
I'm changing the title.
Why you should have hamburgers for breakfast, respectful parenting with Emily Shugarman.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Emily.
Yeah. Right.
Yes, for this very interesting, thought-provoking conversation. I cannot wait to implement these strategies with my kids. Like I said, I'm already, excited about this type of, self-reflection. And I have not heard of the Visible Child. I'm definitely going to check that out. I think that's a wonderful resource.
All right, cool. Well, as always, that's our show, folks. And remember that Babies in Common is a community for you. After all, we all have babies in
common. Jazz hands.
All right, thanks again,
Have a great night, everyone.